Hello, everyone out there. Welcome to another episode of the Bodhana Group webinar series. This is our community content series, which again, we offer free to the public as part of our nonprofit promise to bring news and views of the wonderful, transformative, and skill building power of the board game hobby out to you, the adoring citizens of the Bodhanaverse. I am one of your hosts today. I'm Jack. Hey.
And keeping up the nonprofit promise, or the NPP, yeah, you know me. I am James Kirk. I'll be one of your other facilitators tonight, who will be discussing a game format that is very near and dear to my own heart.
It's the blood that pumps through your heart, sir. Let's be honest here.
Yeah, it is my fire. Tonight, we're going to talk about deck building.
Da-da!
How big it should be. Do you put the grill on it?
Wait,
stains.
No, not that. Not
furniture.
That kind of deck. Not that kind of deck. Although all those things are crucially important. Are you ready to share a presentation? Maybe that'll jar your memory, James.
It probably could.
Because I will say, you do cook a mean steak.
I do feel like this is going to be a running gag, though. Aha!
Hey! All right!
Deck building!
Yes, and again, this is part of our Mechanics Deep Dive series where we go into deep dive talking about specific types of games, not just the skill building stuff that we talk about in other presentations, but we talk specifically about a type of game. We have a couple of great upcoming episodes that we'll talk about here and throughout. But James, go ahead and start to take us through.
Yeah, so let's talk about this. First, we're going to talk about me. That's a great subject. Hi, I'm James. I'm going to be one of the facilitators tonight. You know that because about 30 seconds ago, I said it. I've been a therapeutic game master with Bodhana for over 3 years now. I have 36 years of GMing experience or playing games at the table. Gloomhaven is life. That's not hyperbole. It really is. Frosthaven 2021. And all that jazz. You can also see some of the games in my own personal library right behind that handsome devil right there.
Hey. Handsome devil, there ain't no horns on that guy.
Sure. So next.
Hi, everybody. I'm Jack Birkenstock Jr., MHS. I'm a co-founder of the Bodhana Group. I'm also the executive director. I've been a therapeutic GM for over 5 years, been a gamer since the age of 12. I also have played and I'm knowledgeable in a variety of systems, and I got my master's in human services from Lincoln University of PA in 2008. And there was me running No Thank You Evil for a number of wonderful kiddos years and years back, our first foray into therapeutic gaming. But as Leslie Nielsen would say, that's not important right now. What is important, James?
It's a wonderful question, Jack. I'm very glad you asked. First, our services are important.
Yes.
Real quickly, just in case any of you have not seen our other webinars, we do mention this at the beginning of all of them, but we do offer, once we're allowed to sit next to human beings again, board game programs in like live locations. Therapeutic role-playing groups that we're both doing online and in person, again, when we're allowed to breathe the same air as other people. We do offer consultations and trainings and resource developments for other organizations that want to incorporate PTRPG into their programs or build their own game library. Obviously, our webinar content, you're watching it, so you know that exists. Every year we have our Save Against Fear convention, which is our big to-do fundraiser-y thing, and also awareness raiser. As far as just who we are, what our message is, why we have a picture of a burger on the wall. And this year, it should be known that we have made the decision to go ahead and conduct that again virtually. This year, there will be a lot more detail about that in channels where that's the thing to talk about. Also, check out our Wizards, Warriors, and Wellness book, which is about TTRPG. What does it mean? How do we do it? What are some things you should know? And that is available on Drive-Through RPG, written by a couple of folks in the Bodhana group, or people that we know in the Bodhana group. Hey, that's our stuff.
Oh, this is the grills. So yeah,
I wanted to make sure. I was trying to see if Jack would be worried that I froze. I didn't. It's fine. Yeah, deck building games. Let's talk about it. These guys look like they're having fun, huh?
Yeah, do I need that much wood to play deck building games?
Building a deck.
They are.
You do if you're bringing the lumber.
That is true.
That's a card playing term, probably. So these games, deck building games, are card-based games. And one of the things that I like about one of the many things I like about deck builders is that all of the players, in most every deck builder, you start at the same, like, equal playing level at the beginning. Everybody has the same cards in their deck at the start of the game, so everybody has the same resources to draw on. And it promotes a lot of creativity and response to, you know, the mechanics of the game and what's available to purchase for decks, things like that. Like Uncle Phil the Contractor.
Does Uncle Phil the Contractor play Dominion?
He has Dominion over decks.
Dominion over decks.
Yeah.
Right.
So I guess in that regard, sure. So why are we here? We're here because while all game mechanics can be connected to a type of skill or like skill development, we'll be discussing what deck building can do and what skills it can teach or develop through the playing of deck building games.
Yeah.
Which I think is a pretty succinct goal to have for a presentation about deck builders.
Yeah, no, it's definitely on the money, because as we are going to see, and as with most board games that we talk about in this webinar series, board games are not just, this is just the critical thinking game, or this is just the resiliency game, because those would be pretty lame titles for a game anyway. But board games are a wonderful skill development tool that we advocate for very highly in Bodhana programs, because you can play board games and be working silently on a wealth of different skills that are very important and integral to development. And deck building is just one example of where you really get, I mean, as we're going to find, James, you really get a lot of bang for the buck out of deck building and what it can offer a person, especially with all the different types of deck builders. So I guess we're moving then into just kind of starting an overview.
Yeah. So, deck building involves like all of these aspects that you see here. Some of them more than others in most deck builders. Resource management or resource acquisition is a huge one for deck building games. And you'll see why as we get into, you know, what they are and how most of them play. Reading comprehension, there's cards, they say stuff. We actually have a rule that we're going to show you at some point about deck builders that will refer to the reading comprehension part. Pattern recognition, a lot of the cards have effects or things that happen when you play them out of your hand. Being able to recognize the combinations and patterns that they can form with other cards will be crucial to success. Basic math skills. When you're developing or acquiring your resources, you need to be able to count. Team building aspects. There are deck building games that are cooperative, where it's you against the game. Could be several people, you know, against the game, or just, you know, you guys are playing other players, but you're in teams, and being able to communicate and let your partners know, this is what I have that is going to destroy the other team's face, without actually letting the other team know what the face destruction is or what form it's going to take dozer, so that way they don't steal that information and try to use it against you. So a lot of team communication and cooperation. Resiliency. The game changes because most games have some type of row where you purchase cards for your deck to build it. Yeah. So
It's not just a clever name.
no. And then as you buy cards, new ones are going to become available, but you don't know what those are going to be. Sometimes you have to change your strategy on the fly. Sometimes the villain or the thing that you're fighting in the game develops along with the actual amount of time that the game takes, and you have to change your strategy on how you win. And strategic planning, which is kind of exactly what I just said. You need to have a plan and then execute that plan to excellence, Bret Hart.
Right, but also that strategic plan element. I mean, a lot of games that are out there, specifically what we would define as like Euro games, games with very, you have multiple different paths to victory, and people kind of usually lock into a path and kind of set it. One of the unique things about deck builders is literally the fabric of the game can change every hand that, someone's playing cards in a certain succession, or certain cards come out into the playing arena that you can buy. Also, when we talk specifically about some of the examples that we're going to give you later of different deck builders that are very popular, there are expansions, and expansions add different mechanics, which now means we have to figure out, as part of strategic planning, is taking information and putting it into an existing paradigm. So I understand the way that something works as I have it in a nice little box in front of me. Well,
but now I have new information.
Exactly, and I have to
figure out how that talks to the old info.
Yep.
To still inform my decisions in the best way possible.
Yeah. And a lot of these elements that we talk about, we say this in a lot of our presentations, that one or more of these elements can be found in nearly all games. These are, that's why they are the core, because they are part of gaming at its hobby, specifically the board gaming aspect. But there's a little bit more nuance as to what exactly deck builders are and how they work. Next slide, please, D-Day.
Next slide. So, how do deck build? Right? Like, so how do these games specifically work? So, most deck building games, and you'll see an example on the right of what a card from this is from the DC Universe deck building game from Cryptozoic Entertainment. This is what a card looks like from that set. It's a pretty basic card. But you'll see it's got some numbers, it has some writing on there. There's a plus sign, which means there's maths involved. So each player, usually, strictly speaking, gets the same starter deck, meaning they get 10, 12 cards, whatever it is, and those decks have certain cards in them that everybody gets. Yeah. The cards will have some type of economy or game currency. Now, I will use the card on the right as an example. On the card, you'll see it says +2 power. The DC deck building game has one currency, power. Cards that you play will say +1 power, +2 power, +4 power. They might have other effects, but you're basically trying to build as much power as you can, because that is what you use to purchase or acquire cards. See how I put that into the third one there? So it's
almost like there's a flow to it.
Right. Yeah. Like we had planned it.
Yeah.
Strategically ahead of time, and that the plan is succeeding. Oh my God. Yeah. It's like I'm weaving a basket for your mind. You purchase or acquire cards using whatever the game currency is. The idea here is that you are building some type of strategic advantage with the cards that you've purchased, making a deck that will maximize your ability to overcome challenges in the game, whether that be challenges that the game itself manufactures, or just like, I need to score more points than the other players at the table.
Right.
So whatever those challenges are. Some of the things that naturally come with deck builders is the fact that you might have a deck of 25 cards, but the game only lets you have 5 of them in your hand at a time. You might have a card that lets you draw more things or get more stuff out of your deck, but you're going to have limited resources every turn, because you cannot, for the most part, control everything that's going to come out of your deck and when. There are also, because of the mechanic in deck building games where there is some type of like market, or row that you can purchase cards from, that market changes constantly. When there's 2 players in the game, probably a better chance that when a card comes up in the market, you're going to be able to get what you want. When you have 4 players or 5 players, depending on how many people are in the game, we start to see that whole problem with supply and demand, and that problem of demand in the market, and a high value card comes out and everybody starts competing for it, and like, oh, do I have the resources this turn to buy it? And then you got to watch everybody's face to see if somebody's making the I'm gonna buy that card face at the table that tells you I should probably just give up on that particular dream at this point, because Susie's going to get that card instead of me. Yep. So there are, to win at deck building games, there's more often than not, it's like a victory point style of thing in a lot of different deck builders. Some of them are even narrative based. Yeah. Like or story based. Some of them have completely different mechanics to them. There's a big bad that the game itself controls, and you and the other players are just trying to defeat the big bad. So they can be competitive or cooperative. They can be a bit of both. Co-opetitive.
Yeah. Co-opetitive. That word is patent pending, by the way.
Yeah. Don't steal that.
Please.
Unless you do, because it's not actually patented yet, so I can't really legally stop you. Please don't.
True.
So those are really like the main functions within a deck building game. You start at the same level, you purchase cards to build whatever strategy you're trying to work for during the course of the game, and you either try to be the first to get the most if you're playing competitively, or you work with your friends against some sort of global challenge if you're playing cooperatively.
Yeah.
Those are the things.
Yeah, so there's multiple different types of deck building games that are out there. So deck building, again, is a classification of game, covers a very wide array because, of course, as with anything else, once a certain type of game comes out into the market, and it's, it really was quite groundbreaking when deck builders kind of came onto the scene, because traditionally when we look at most board gaming as a hobby, we kind of started with what we call roll and goes, so you roll the dice, you move your pawn, things happen. Occasionally cards fit in, but they were usually kind of like, special things that would happen. In some cases, cards would drive the action, like in a game like Sorry, but with deck builders, the game is centered around the deck. So collectible card games is one type of a deck builder that's out there, and most popularly it's things like Magic, Yu-Gi-Oh, Pokemon. There's a massive amount of card options to this. And it's important to understand the difference between these, because some people's play styles lend themselves to different styles of games. I, for one, cannot really graft to a collectible card game like Magic the Gathering. To me, there are too many options. I can't remember all the options, so I get overwhelmed easily. That's one of my, I can't do it. Now, additionally, there's a large financial buy-in, typically because of the large amount of card options. Typically, collectible card games, you're collecting the cards. So you will buy booster packs or starter packs or sample packs if you go to things like a draft night or something of that sort, where you're basically hoping that you will get a certain card or a special version of a card. That card typically will be more special than others. People also,
and I do want to mention here that with collectible card games, there is the danger of falling into that hole of like having that whole gambler's itch.
Yeah.
Because
definitely.
you're building a deck and you need this specific card, and it's in this specific set, and there were 180 cards in the set. Each pack comes with 14 randomized cards. All right, so I'm just gonna get 2 packs. I'm gonna see what happens, and you get like a good card, but it's not the one you wanted. And you're like, man, I got a good card though, so like maybe I'll just get another one. Like that stuff happens. I'm not saying I'm speaking from experience. I'm saying it happens. And then some, like before you know it, you're halfway through a gallon of milk sitting inside an empty cardboard box with just foil booster packs ripped open everywhere. You don't remember how you got there or what day it is, but
you got that rare foil.
You have 2 Balduvian hordes, by golly.
Yeah, clearly James has played Magic. Then there are also living card games, which are kind of a unique hybrid. Living card games are campaign style games typically, so they follow somewhat of a storyline, and the cards and everything are kind of themed around that campaign. So you're playing in a progressive storyline. And again, we're going to show you some examples at towards the end of the webinar. But a lot of this will then have different expansions or different sets that can get added on. So if you want to add to your story, you can add an expansion or you can add a set. The idea is these living card games, they have a moderate financial buy-in. You can kind of either choose to or choose not to go with whatever the expansion is, and there are different benefits and drawbacks to each style of format. The one that is probably one of the more popular is the self-contained deck builder. It's all you need in one box. The game typically has limited card options. You have a certain set, and that is what you play the game with. Once you buy the set, you can play. Sometimes there are different options or expansions that you can't get in the other types of deck builders. There are still expansions from time to time with self-contains, but for the most part, you're going to see a lot smaller amount, like it might be just a very brief expansion or something of that set. And there is a lot of overlap. These are the more common ways that these games are reflected upon. So they're not hard and fast rules. You can find self-contained deck builders that have a ton of different options. We're going to talk about Marvel Legendary, which technically isn't a living card game. It's a deck builder, but it has a ton of expansions that add a lot of variety to the game, which if you like the property, is very attractive. And it gives a lot of life and vibrance to the game. So those are your basic types.
It's kind of unique with deck builders in that one format of like a type of deck builder feeds into the other ones, right? So collectible card games are these like massive options, large financial buy-in, completely randomized acquiring of the cards unless you go to places that have singles available that you can, you could get the deck that you want without having to buy booster packs and just in exchange for the low price of, depending on the game that you're playing, your kidney. And then there's I'm not kidding, folks. The cards are expensive.
Yeah. Some of these cards, like people have sold old valuable cards from collectible and they bought houses.
I paid for off-campus housing and bought a car. With
True story.
I got rid of them. Yep. Living card games are kind of the same thing as collectible card games in that you're building your own deck from scratch, right? Except that with living card games, you're doing it off of a set of cards that you know what you're getting. So when you purchase the main set, if I went out and I got a box for a living card game and my friend got a box for the same living card game, we have the exact same cards. And what we do with them, you can build your own deck just like you can with collectible card games. So the expansions that come out also have card lists, and you can see exactly what it is you're getting. And you can kind of make the decision, do I want that expansion or not want that expansion?
Right.
Self-contained deck builders kind of took the idea of building a deck, and instead of front-loading that, where you put your deck together and then you go to sit down to play. Now with a deck builder, they give you the pieces to build a deck, and you play with other people and progressively build the deck as the game goes, as opposed to putting the deck together, building it, collecting the cards that you want, and then, seeing how it plays at the table against other people. So it's very interesting to me as deck builders have kind of changed the way that they work. This same format sort of plays off of itself as it goes to these different styles of deck building games. Some people don't like to build their own decks from scratch. They would much rather play a deck builder that's just, here's all the cards, this is what I start with, I have my starting deck, I add cards to it.
Yeah, that's me.
As opposed to, I have 7,000 cards, I have to build a deck of 60. Some people like that challenge. So when you're playing deck builders or when you're experiencing deck builders, we want to talk about some of the skills that these things can build on. Let's start with strategic thinking, mostly because it's at the top of the list, and that's where we should start. So strategic thinking comes in two forms here, with resource management and advanced planning. Advanced planning, we already kind of talked about a little bit, but advanced planning is part of the responding to what the game gives you. Like you're trying to make lemonade the whole time with whatever lemons have been put in the basket. But your planning becomes sort of remembering what you've already put in that deck and being able to think ahead to, okay, how can I maximize the options that I've already put in here? And you start to kind of learn what to look for or the things that can benefit you. You can also start to eliminate certain options because they are not going to be beneficial to you. You know, I know, like, I'm building a deck that uses blue and green cards. So if yellows come out, I'm probably not going to want those, right? Like you kind of develop this strategy of what's good and what isn't good. And then managing your resources. Some games will give you resources and then build in ways to make you lose them. You know, other games, those resources that you got in the beginning of the game actually become a liability later because you want different cards, but they take up the same space.
Yeah.
In a 30-card deck, each card takes up the exact same amount of space as every other card. So if you only get 5 in your hand, and 2 of those cards on your turn are your garbage beginning of the game resources, you know, so you have to kind of manage the resources that are in your deck, find better ways to purchase cards more reliably, replace old resources with new resources. There's a lot of that.
Yeah, I mean, because bear in mind also, depending on the deck builder that you're playing and that you're buying, you're going to learn over time, you know, ways, because there are also different strategies or different, you know, like for Marvel Legendary as one example that we're going to talk about pretty extensively because it's an incredible deck builder. The idea of that game, that different heroes that they bring in from the Marvel Universe and different sets that they have bring in different mechanics that now, you know, mean, okay, so this is now the new resource or an additional resource or in a different way that I can play cards that in some ways builds upon the existing cards that are there. In other ways, it's a completely new paradigm that you now have to kind of, you know, it's one of those things that it keeps the game fresh by you constantly having to learn, because that's a big thing about deck builders in general as part of your strategy is single cards alone are not going to do it, but cards that chain off of each other, cards that add to each other, whether it is you have different symbols on the card that, you know, the more red that you have, the more powerful this is, or the more blue you have, the more powerful that is. There are cards that will build on each other, so you want to have more of that type of card. A lot of flexibility in how you can play, so it really kind of opens it up to what you can do, but also how complicated some of that can be. Now, going further, there are also, specifically with some of your cooperative deck builders, there are a lot of negotiation skills. So if you are playing a game like, again, Marvel Legendary, it's a cooperative deck builder. You're playing with the other members of the table to beat the villains that are coming into the play arena. You need to cooperate to be able to say, well, this is what I'm working. Could you save that card for me? Or, oh, in a couple rounds, provided all the cards in my hand stay there, I can beat 2 of the opposition challenges that are out on the field right now. I can beat 2 bad guys up. Okay, cool. So you're strategizing with players around the table, and you have to do a little bit of hemming and hawing. One person in a deck build co-op cannot be the only all-star because things are constantly happening in the game. So you'll see that not only with Marvel Legendary, but you'll see it with things like Harry Potter, Battle for Hogwarts, the deck builder. There are a ton of different co-op deck builder games that are incredible for developing this sense of negotiation and partnering and collaboration with other people. Now, there is still some negotiation that goes along with competition because there's a lot of cards out there. There's a lot of things to do on the board. And again, everybody kind of wants to be the all-star sometimes. So learning competition wise how you do this in that game. You take the Marvel game, that's co-op. You take the DC game, that's completely competitive. You're racing for the most victory points. Different styles, but they're all teaching some of the same central skills of social negotiation and collaboration. So a lot of deals to be made in the context of a deck builder. And yeah, it really opens you up for a lot of different opportunity.
And then reading, which is fun. Demental.
Boo.
Some of your basic core person skills, right? Like that's how they communicate how cards work in the game. Text.
Yeah.
On the cards.
But it's even like one of the things that I've always found interesting that I think could mean a lot to a lot of parents who want their children to develop with reading comprehension. I mean, the basic math we've kind of talked about, but
sure,
there is a secondary language somewhat to board gaming as a hobby. Like words that mean a thing mean a totally different thing in the context of the board gaming hobby. And I think where you talk about just using the phrase on the stack, I'm thinking pancakes like that, I'm having waffles. But in a deck builder, that's a totally different phrase for what on the stack means, or when it says, you have to use this card from your hand versus from your discard pile versus, in your deck. Those are three different sources to get cards from. And sometimes even the order that you play things in is highly important to whether or not a combo will fire off. So that comprehension piece is not just reading the words, it's understanding the order of operation to what goes on in the game. And sometimes you'll find that deck builders are very different from each other in the order of operation. Some games, doesn't matter. As long as you play at that hand, you're fine. Other games, I have to play this before I play this other card. Otherwise, the thing I want to pop is not going to happen. So you get comprehension. You also get attention and focus to what's going on in the game. Very important. And honestly, it's something that, because of the amount of mechanics and the card interplay, I think it's something unique to deck builders you don't tremendously find in a lot of other board games.
Yes.
All right, no disagreement.
I didn't know if you were waiting for me to say something. And we've also kind of like this last one, adjusting plans based on new stimulus. I think through everything else that we've been describing, you probably get the idea of what that's based on, that these games are changing as you're playing them. The options that you have are changing as you play them. The strategies of like the game villains will develop over time, and you have to be ready to take whatever plan you had, throw it out the window, and make a new one based on what you currently have. Again, resource management. Part of that is understanding what resources you have and then how best to deploy them for whatever the current situation is.
Yep. All right.
So some challenges or limitations of deck building games. Sometimes deck builders can be really hard for absolutely no one's fault. Nobody at the table did anything wrong. It was a bad shuffle.
Yeah.
Like the game itself, like, play the hand that you're dealt. Yeah. That happens. Know when to hold them and when to fold them. I thought that was just laundry at one point. Nope. It's cards in life too.
See, now I'm seeing Kenny Rogers doing ads for deck builder games, like he's the spokesman for Magic the Gathering. Sorry, moving on.
So there's a varying difficulty with games because there is a random element in these games. The shuffle of the deck, heart of the cards, top decking, like just what's going to come up. Oh God, I hope that card isn't the one card that's left out of the 5 cards in that deck that will cause us to lose the game. And everybody holds their breath for a second.
Yep.
There's the game can be easy or difficult sometimes, based on how things fall.
Yeah, because you can never tell what's going to come out. So if you're really looking for, James earlier was talking about like high purchase value cards. If those come out in the beginning of the game, bear in mind your resources on average, you're not going to be able to buy those cards for a while. So think about it in terms of game term. Do you have these cards out there that can't be bought, so they can't be taken out of the purchase area, so you don't get fresh cards? So now literally you're at okay, I guess I'll buy this cheap thing that might give me enough points. Who knows? So it's random chance. Meanwhile, the game still continues on and the larger story, if you will, of what's going on. So that varying difficulty can really be impactful, partially to a fun. So, I mean, I think it's one of those things that just kind of warn people that have never played a deck builder before. This is not necessarily a straight strategy game that you can count for everything. That randomness, which James is going to talk about in 2 bullet points here, because that's definitely one of his areas to analyze. That can be a humongous challenge for people, and part of this, having these varying difficulty and varying options that come out, is where paralysis analysis comes in. This is something we've talked about in other webinars, but it's the paradigm that if you have a ton of different options, sometimes there are too many things that you could possibly do that you could spend forever, conceivably looking over what would be the perfect choice. Well, part of deck builders is you're not going to necessarily always be able to make the perfect choice. Sometimes I have to get a card that I don't necessarily want because it's something standing in the way of doing something that I really need. So a lot of times that's even that strategy of, well, I was building this and I want this. Well, now it has to change because of an element that happens to the game. Paralysis analysis can be very real, especially with certain games like I'm trying to think of the one that has, not just a row of 5 cards, but there's an entire marketplace of like 12 different decks that you could select things to purchase from. That choice can take some players a very long time because they're very concerned about making the perfect choice. Sometimes with the deck builder, it's just, let's see where this takes me, and just kind of do your best with it, which, James, that brings us to how to understand or manipulate randomness.
Yeah, so this is really discussing the ideas of probability, right? Knowing that I have X% chance of pulling a card that I need out of a 40 card deck. So there's different ways to perceive this, but I want to say that for every level of this, whether you're playing a deck builder where you're building as you play the game, or you're doing a living or collectible card game where you're kind of constructing your deck ahead of time, in both instances, this is a learned progressive skill. This is not something you play like 2 or 3 times and you're like, yes, I am now the Scarlet Witch. I can do probability, right? Like I understand random chance and I can manipulate it and bend it to my will. No, this is a learned skill that takes a long time to be able to practice and get good at being able to do it with any deck builder put in front of you. The idea being that if you're creating your deck beforehand, you have the ability to kind of stack your deck. Most games will tell you that you can have a certain number of each type of card in the deck. So you want to fill it with the stuff that you want because you want the stuff that you want to come up more often. Games are also really smart in the fact that the cards that you really, really want, like they're going to tell you, you can have 1 copy of this in your deck. Right? So now I have to figure out of 40 cards, how do I make sure that I get that one that I'm going to need to be able to, like, maybe pull off my coup de grace toward the end of the game, or get it so I can put it in play and have it so that it continues to do its benefit for me. Understanding how to manipulate that is one of those things that goes from you being like a decent deck builder and a decent card player to being like a really good card player, when you can understand and kind of manipulate numbers and be able to find loopholes. There are cards that will allow you to search your deck for a thing. Okay, well, how many of those can I put in there? Because then that helps me to go find the things that I need when I need them.
Or cards that allow you to just simply draw extra cards.
Draw extra cards.
Yeah, if you have a lot of those.
Reveal cards to find a thing and then discard the rest of the ones that you don't need. Like all of that stuff. It's a couple of different connotations, but I will throw a game term at you called milling. Think of a windmill that just keeps churning, right? So you are churning through your deck. You are milling your deck to find the things that you want out of it and try to get as much of the chaff out of the way as possible. Magic players will sit here and they will say, nope, that's got a completely different meaning, because when I mill a deck, I'm getting rid of my enemy's cards to try to reduce them to 0 and win the game. Guys, I hear you. Okay, there's different ways.
Again, a whole different lexicon to learn, right?
Right. Yeah, and we're not getting into that, but I just want to get across the idea that understanding and manipulating randomness is not something that happens after you play a couple of times. So it is something, and the reason that we put it as a challenge is because it is a very challenging skill to learn. There are some things that you can do in every deck builder across the whole wide berth of them, that you can do to kind of manipulate that randomness. There are other factors that are just inherent to certain games. So now not only do you have to learn the skill of it, but now you have to learn how to apply it to each of those different games as you go through and play them. Yeah. And that's very tough to learn, and very easy to just kind of give up on and be like, well, it's random, I can't do anything about it.
Yep. And a lot of folks out there don't prefer games with a lot of randomness to them. That's kind of another bitter battle in the board game field, but that's kind of why we say that there is a steep learning curve to deck builder games. Now, what we mean by this is the basic mechanics of a deck builder are fairly easy. You learn what the purchasing power is. You learn what the economy is, as it were, is in the game. So you learn how you buy things and how to use things. That is the simple part. The tough part is learning the intricate demands of each game and how those cards interplay with each other. The game length sometimes can be a little bit daunting for people. That, there's sometimes deck builders take a while to play. We're talking 2 to 4 hours for some really good deck builders, because you're talking now of people taking rounds to buy the cards that they want, taking turns to, then earn the victory points that they need within that game. So that game length could be part of the learning curve. It's just something to accept about a deck builder. This is not a 30-minute game unless it's some bizarre, weird kind of like short form deck builder. And then the setup and cleanup. Again, I kind of complained to James about this constantly about Marvel Legendary. As much as I celebrate the brilliance of having like 20 different expansion sets and packs and such, there 27. Is the 27, but who's counting? There is still the idea that every game you're shuffling in different villains, different masterminds, different sets from all of these expansions that mean that every time you set up the game, you're shuffling in a bunch of stuff. So then after the game is over, you have to then separate all of those back into their respective piles, right? That complex setup or cleanup can be uncomfortable for some players because it adds a little bit of time to the board game. That thing on the box that says 45 minutes, that doesn't really take into account what your setup or your cleanup is. That's just the time to play the game. So understand that because of all the moving parts of a deck builder, that could be a challenge for some players. They may not want to engage in those types of games because it's simply too long. That kind of brings us, James, do you want to take moving parts?
Well, yeah. So there's constantly changing situations during the course of the game. Some folks like to just be able to sit down, play a game. They know what they're getting. They know what they're getting into, as opposed to having a game that I knew what we were doing 20 minutes ago, but that is not what we're doing now, because the goals have changed. Maybe the resources that we were competing for now mean something different. Maybe there's something that came out on the board that nobody can handle that has changed the rules of the game until we can get rid of it. You know, there's all kinds of different things that can happen during the course of a deck build. That it sometimes becomes too much to keep track of, especially if you have games that have multiple resources. I showed you guys earlier, the DC deck builder uses just power for everything. There are some deck builders that use resources for up to 3 or 4 different types of cards. You know, whether it be sci-fi games. One that I'm thinking of that's like kind of a deck builder called Beyond the Sun, that uses resources for different types of cards, and you decide whether you are heavy into your crew and the people that are on your ship, or the defenses of your ship, or the like planet exploration or scientific development. And there's different resources, but it becomes this that you're trying to keep track of, and that's like 4 turns into the game, right? So there's some that can get very complicated, and all of those quote moving parts of what do I focus on where can be very daunting when somebody says, like, I just want a board with can we just play Scoville?
Yeah, can we just do a thing?
Yeah.
And those moving parts, then there are competing resources out there. So some of the challenges, it might get very frustrating for some players to have a strategy, and you've been waiting for this and building onto this, and then all of a sudden, because of the changing face of the board or just the other players, those competing resources and strategies having to get changed can be very frustrating for people, especially if they are not akin to the deck builder universe. So it really is, it goes back to that steep learning curve. And honestly, a lot of things about board games, because you may be sitting out there going, but I really want to bring this game in, but I really want to learn this, but there's so many pieces, there's so many parts, there's so many things. One of the things about the board game hobby it is something that builds upon itself. So the more games that you play, you eventually, much like we talk about with role-playing games, of being able to analyze a rule book and go, here's the important parts. When you start to play more board games, you start to look at the different mechanics, and you're able to analyze games the more that you play. So like James said, the more that you get into this, not only things for understanding randomness and whatnot, but also understanding how deck builders work. Once you get this system of how a deck builder works, it's merely the fluff, it's the decoration, it's the icing, if you will, that you have to learn in other subsequent games. So even though there are challenges or limits, what do we have next to talk about there, sir?
Well, so there's definitely some tips for how to be successful, not only playing but teaching deck builders. With all games, you will get very tired of hearing me say this. They need to know how they're going to win.
Why is that important, James?
Because they need to know the goal, what they're working for. You can't just tell people play and then they don't know what they're doing.
That's true.
Every decision that you make during the game informs on what your goal is. If you don't know what the goal is, you are going to make a series of poor decisions, which in a deck builder, where one of the main focuses is building and maintaining and managing resources, if you don't spend those resources appropriately, garbage, right? It's just not going to go well. And then you're going to have resentful friends and players. And they're going to feel like you didn't tell them things because you just wanted to win. And that's not okay.
Yeah, and how to win also includes how to defend against certain things. within the context of the game. You have to prepare people for as many aspects. And again, one of the reasons this kind of goes into the next thing of RTFC, which is read the flipping card, wink, is, those most deck builders, thankfully modern deck builders, I should say, have the instructions of what the card does and how it operates on the actual card itself. So it is one of those, once you know the basics, you really have to play to get better, because you don't know what's going to be on all the cards that are there. But the more that you play, the more you interact with these mechanics, and the more that you get familiar with the way that certain cards interplay with other cards. So that reading of the card is highly important. And this is another one of those things that we say in general for different types of board games, but while you're playing specifically a deck builder, because of the amount of time that the game already can take, one thing to be successful of is read the stuff that you have in your hand while other turns are going on. Because read the card is not only understand the game, but read the card is have your strategy in mind as best as you can before it comes time for your turn. Because remember, a lot of moving parts, a lot of ways to, construct and play your deck. And, there's so many different aspects of this that waiting until, oh, it's my turn. Hold on. Oh, let's see what I got going on here. You're now talking a 6-hour game, which can get very frustrating. So, reading the card, knowing what you're learning, what you're trying to do is a very heavy aspect of how to have these games be more successful. By the time in a 5-player game it comes around to you, you should already have a pretty good idea of what's going on the board. There shouldn't be that many surprises. So as a way to help these be more fun for everyone, have a plan,
Yeah, and being able to explain the card types and their interactions. There are just some games that you're not going to be able to do all of that before you start playing, because people are going to tune out. They're just going to get bored, and you're going to have to kind of learn by doing. But players should be familiar with the basic types of cards that are in the game. Like, there are equipment cards, hero cards, villain cards, superpowers, and starter cards.
Yeah. Defense cards.
And these are the types of cards that are in the game. They all have a different colored border, so that just in case, like you didn't bring your reading glasses, you can at least see the colors. To know, don't play a deck builder without your reading glasses. The interactions with the cards, you learn as you go. Sometimes, we'll play a game of Marvel Legendary, and I will have to give a refresher in the beginning on some of the keywords that you will see on cards as you play the particular game that's been built. You don't have to go over everything, just what's in that game.
Because Marvel Legendary, like with what did you say, 27 expansions?
Yeah, number 28 coming in.
Yeah, that's a lot of keywords. That's a lot of special abilities and powers that literally it can take just 2 hours to explain everything. And I understand a lot of people out there are like, but I need to know everything that I can do to be able to play this game and win effectively. And it's like, well, that's part of the learning curve. Then this is one of the ways that you overcome it. And another way,
explaining card types and interactions harkens back to RTFC, because a lot of the interactions of how the cards play with each other is learned by reading the cards. Like, unless you're willing to sit there and listen to somebody read every card that's in every deck that's going to be in the game, like just play and learn as you go, but allow for that learning time.
Yeah.
Right? Allow for that ability for somebody to, when you're looking at the market of available cards, somebody new to the game might pick up like 5 cards out of that like 9 that are sitting in the market because they haven't seen any of them. And they want to read what they do, so because they want to make an informed decision. Yep. So if they know what the goals are and they can read the cards and you've allowed for learning time, explaining card types and interactions is actually pretty quick, because a lot of it harkens back to the earlier stuff that if you've done those other things, this part's actually really simple.
Yeah. And even the next point about encouraging communication. Again, there's a standing rule that we have at our game table when we play that is yes, we want to win, but
I
we
bring
also
the pretzels.
well, that is especially if they're butter pretzels. But it's also the idea that yes, we want to win, but we also want to make sure that we have communication that is allowing, again, for these foundational elements that James said that are integral to any kind of board game learning. Where if I'm trying to help people enjoy the game and have a good time, part of that is making sure that we're allowing for communication. Now, in a cooperative deck builder, it's absolutely necessary. We had a situation last night. We were playing a game, and in the middle of playing, I was kind of like, "Oh man, I think I'm boned. I totally think I'm I'm totally done." James, you're gonna trounce me, and James was like, "You could do this. It may not work, but there's a possibility that you could do this move, which might help." And I went, "Huh, I think I'll try that." And lo and behold, sheer luck, it happened to be able to get me to win the game. And of course, James and I, when this happens, like for now, granted, it happens more times to benefit me than James, but yeah, it's a little bit of a bummer because we want to win, but at the same time, it's good game. It's good game to encourage communication. We very much have a learning table kind of atmosphere. Once people are learning the game, once people are going in, let's have communication between players to kind of make sure that everybody's on a level playing field. Because doesn't a win feel better when it's from equal footing, right? That's
Yeah.
kind of what it is.
If somebody loses because of something they didn't know that they find out you knew, that's resentful.
Yeah.
When somebody loses because of a thing that they didn't know because they forgot it was a thing or that they could do it, nobody to blame but themselves at that point.
Yeah, it's different.
Because they'd learned the mechanics. You guys learned the game. You knew what the deal was. So know the basic mechanics when possible. Yep. Right? Like know sort of the step-by-step operation of how cards are played, or if you're playing a game where you have to pay a cost to play cards from your hand, know where to get those resources, how to build those resources.
Absolutely.
Everybody needs to understand the basic building mechanics to build a deck, to be able to have fun, right? To be able to enjoy the game. And if they're enjoying the game and having fun, that's when the skill building comes in. If they're not enjoying and they're not having fun, they also are not going to play, right? So that's where like all of this really, this whole list just feeds into everything else on this list.
Yeah, and it's also, I mean, don't be afraid to watch playthrough videos online. Well, how-tos to get the general flow, because sometimes, these mechanics can get a little confusing. So there's a lot of resources out there, and those are just some tips. So I believe we're going next into.
We are.
Yeah, some examples of some deck builders.
Games.
Yeah.
So
we should games.
Yeah, so we should talk first about the original deck builder, Dominion.
OGD.
Yeah, there are numerous expansions for Dominion.
Oh yeah.
Produced by Rio Grande Games. It built its own world, right? Which is part of what made it appealing, because it has a narrative behind it, and it has a world that continues to build with these expansions.
Yep.
As you go. So this is a competitive deck builder, where you're competing against the other players, to kind of get the best locations and the most wealth and score the most victory points. But there are random assortments of what can be available during the game that you can actually select in the beginning of the game. Dominion is one of those games that has like a marketplace that has like all sorts of things available, and some of it you have to build up to be able to get to. Some of it you can get in the beginning of the game. So it's that strategic planning of being able to see the whole thing, but then also knowing I can't get to like these tiers until later, but I need to use these to effectively build to these. Because of the different varied combinations and because of all of the expansions and everything, there's a high replay value. You're going to see that as something that I'm going to tag a lot of these games with. a lot of these deck builder games, the reason why we say you get a lot of bang for your buck, you can purchase this game and like 2 expansions and have completely unique games,
Yeah.
for months, based on, how the cards interact, and maybe you have a combination of cards that you hadn't had at the table before, and you learn a new thing, but Dominion is kind of what kicked off this whole idea of the deck builder as the like self-contained, I buy this, I can play the game like it's a board game.
Yeah, and it's still popular to this day. But yeah,
yes.
Go ahead, James. This is for you, dude.
Speaking of things that kicked off a craze that's still going even now, Magic the Gathering, collectible card game originally designed by Richard Garfield, Wizards of the Coast, distributed. So this is kind of like the grandfather of the collectible like deck building sort of games where you collected cards, made the deck that you wanted to make, and then brought it to the table to play. So you get starter decks that have, X number of cards in it. You can take the deck out, shuffle it, read the rules, play the game. And then you can get, what are called booster packs that allow you to get additional cards from a particular set, that you can add to decks that you're building. This has a very, very deep world built for it.
A world so deep that they made it into a Dungeons and Dragons setting for role playing.
There's a D&D setting.
Is. Yeah,
there's a series of novels about it. There's all kinds of fan fiction. So much so to the point that they created later on in the game beings called planeswalkers that are kind of like avatars of specific colors, and these planeswalkers have interactions. There's games on consoles, computer.
Yep.
This game is massively popular. Still massively popular.
Yeah. Every year they still release expansions. I think there's at least 4 major releases every year.
Yeah. At this point, and it can feel daunting. But I do want to note for anybody that's that's watching this, that's like, man, I've always been curious about that game, but it just seems like there's so much. Competitively, this game usually keeps like the last base set that came out is the legal base set. If you were to go to like competitive play, you can't use cards that came out 3-4 years ago. Like you need to use the most current stuff and the most current expansions to be able to do like the competitive stuff. Now, if you go and you just play for funsies, yeah, you're going to run into people that are going to have stuff that you have never seen before in your life. You're going to get trounced. You're going to feel bad about it. That sort of thing. But I will say that the vast amount of players that I've met playing Magic the Gathering, genuinely some very good people.
Yeah.
When I was younger and I was a kid, I played this game with adults and other peers, and I made a lot of friendships that were meaningful playing this game. So while we've seen videos of like dude flipping the table, and we've seen like Magic freakouts, and you can see a room full of Magic players and be like, card floppers, like there is a bad rap, I think, that players get for this thing, but I genuinely would not trade any of the time I spent when I was younger playing this, developing decks, learning strategy, for anything. It was time that I feel like was such well spent time. Learning this game and all the people that I met playing it. So I very much encourage you, if you do want to try it out, visit a local game store, try out a Magic night, go meet some of the people that are there. I'm not saying they're all going to be great, but I'm saying that people are people, and we generally try to be good to each other. That's going to be my soapbox moment for the night, I think.
All right.
Marvel Legend, wait for it.
Take this one. Oh, geez.
Gary. This is probably the game that I champion the most at the table. So this was designed by Upper Deck, which I only knew them as a baseball and like sports trading card company before this happened. So it utilizes the Marvel Comics property deep, deep, deep cuts into the Marvel universe of both comics and the MCU. This is a cooperative deck builder. So where Dominion and Magic the Gathering are mainly competitive games, Marvel Legendary is one of those self-contained build the deck as you go games, like Dominion is. But this one, you're working cooperatively to defeat some sort of evil villain mastermind. All kinds of the most recognizable ones. And then dudes like Macho Gomez, where you're like, who is this guy? And it might for kids that like to read comics, this could very much motivate them to kind of look into these characters more. And, dare I say, read more. That's a nice side effect, right? I think we'd all like to have that. But you combine your forces, you combine your cards, and your efforts. Each player has their own separate deck. You're just working together to try to defeat this mastermind. The randomization of gameplay allows for either, for example, I have an app on my phone that I just hit a button and the phone tells me, based on it knowing all the expansions that I have, do this. It's just completely random, Or I can make scenarios based on comic book stories, and put characters together and have a fun time that way.
Yep.
This game does use two different resources, one for purchasing cards and one for attacking other things in the game. So there are two economies to balance, which can complicate things. This Marvel Legendary also led the company to a series of single releases that are technically they can combine with Marvel Legendary. I haven't done it. I like to keep my mashed potatoes separate from my roast beef when it comes to this particular type of
Seen some things I wouldn't recommend it.
So they have various different IPs. There's an Alien encounters, Predator encounters, which, yes, for those of you that are kind of squeeing that haven't heard of this before, yeah, you can do AVP. There's a Buffy, the Vampire Slayer, which is one of my personal favorites. Also James Bond, which was, I think, the most recent encounters. Yeah. There's an X-Files, Firefly, like there's all kinds of different properties. So but this one game...
No Christopher Lloyd Legendary encounters.
It's a travesty.
Absolutely, Marty.
Yeah, so I can't recommend this game enough. The replay value is through the roof with the sheer amount of different things you can do with this game if you have all of the things for it. Lord of the Rings.
Better than I do, yeah.
So Lord of the Rings is an example of what we called a living card game. You can see at the bottom right of the box picture, you see a little thing that says LCG, living card game. Most famously, living card games are put out by Fantasy Flight. They have a series of these based on different properties. Game of Thrones, Call of Cthulhu, which is one that I actually really enjoy. Lord of the Rings is stupendously fun. So this is based off of the fact that as a living card game, if I bought this box, I would get X number of cards. They would be the same cards I would get in every box of this that I would purchase. If I wanted to expand my thing, I would have to buy the expansion packs for it. What's cool about Lord of the Rings is that sets and expansions, while they come with predetermined cards, each expansion is a new story to play through. This is one of those narrative-based games.
Yep.
So there is a narrative motivation for your characters to be on whatever quest they're on. You have to balance being able to open the next leg of the quest with, and I'll use a metaphor, how much noise you make along the way. Because there's an ever-growing, you guys have seen Lord of the Rings, probably. I'm sure you've probably read the books. There's an ever-growing threat, ever watchful, right? So as the game goes, threat continues to build, and it is sometimes built based off of your actions, right? And if there's too much threat built in the game, then the bad guys know that you're there, and then the game just goes completely mimsy at that point. But really fresh sort of card playing experience because it is narratively driven. It's not making victory points. It's not competing for some type of victory resource at the end of the game. It is a cooperative work together to finish the story, which I really enjoy.
Yeah, it plays very well, and I'm not a big Tolkien head,
You are not, and
No.
Jack did enjoy the gameplay for this one.
Very much so. So
Yeah,
I got to take at least one of these here. Clank, and this is a game that James has really kind of turned me on to over time. So Clank is it's kind of a weird hodgepodge. There's a lot of actual versions of this. So it is a deck builder put out by Renegade. But it has a dungeon crawl feel to it, where your whole idea is that your players are going to get treasure, and you're going through a map of a dungeon trying to avoid the evil of the dragon. So, or the space enemy, or the mummy, depending on which version you're going through, or the mega fantasy based corporation, which is a Clank, which is a legacy game, which is another type of game that we'll talk about at some point. So it's competitive mainly, but there are some kind of co-op elements depending on what goes on, like challenges that you may have to defeat together, or in the case of the legacy game, Clank Acquisitions Incorporated, you're actually advancing the story together, because then you're expanding your board, which makes it even more exciting. So you delve into this dungeon, claim an artifact, but certain cards in your deck, one of the negative happenstances is that you create clank. You create noise that might awake the sleeping dragon, who attacks people based on random draw pulls out of a cloth bag that contains everyone's little clank cubes. Tremendously fun, and it's one of these it was this very interesting hybrid that had never kind of really been seen before, of doing, wait, so you're going to do a deck builder, but I get a board? You're crazy. Get out of my boardroom. Like, I don't have a boardroom, but it would sound nuts to me at the time. But several expansions, different game boards for different environments. There's an app that adds a lot of complications onto it as well. Tremendously fun. My favorite version is, I personally love Clank in Space, mostly because I'm more of a sci-fi guy than a fantasy guy. But I mean, is there anything that I've missed on this, James? Because this game, if you haven't played it, you must.
Three different resources in this game, because it adds the dungeon crawl aspect to it. There's an economy for purchasing cards and an economy for fighting things in the game, like Legendary had. Mm-hmm. Now you add in an economy for movement, generating move points for your meeple to be able to move through the dungeon. So cards that you purchase will have combinations of different economies on them. It's another thing to balance. But it's presented in such a light way, and the game has a really great, I feel like a really great, like, tested feel to it. Like, they really kind of worked out, how many cards do we need to provide the players that do these three different things, and in what combination of them, to make this game feel balanced.
Yeah, and
the game does feel very, very balanced.
Absolutely.
Yeah, well executed. Definitely a favorite of mine. Oh boy. Yeah. So up to this point,
did we mention that James loves deck builders? Did we mention that at all during the presentation?
Up to this point, we've been talking about deck builders either being where you create the deck ahead of time, or you build the deck while you're playing the game. In those instances, you have entire cards. I know that sounds weird. So AEG Games came up with this brilliant take on deck builders called Mystic Veil. The art on this game and the presentation on this game is unparalleled. It is gorgeous.
Absolutely. The whole thing is beautiful.
It's themed around druids, and the preservation of nature. So Mystic Veil is based off of what is called a card crafting system. What that means is you get card sleeves that are, like yay tall. And the cards have 3 different sections, an upper, a middle, and a lower section. Some of your sleeves are completely blank in the game. There's nothing on them. Some of your cards have one thing on them. So as you play the game, you purchase slots for your cards in your deck. You are not only crafting a deck, you are literally building the cards that are in your deck and the combination of things that they can do when they're played. It's outside of just sitting here gawking and saying it's brilliant. I don't know what else I could really say about it. The fact that you are building, like when I play a deck builder and I get Clank, I get a gem. I know what that gem does. Every time I play the game, that gem does the same thing. Now think about a deck builder where I had a gem, but I was able to change the things that gem could do every time I played the game, based on the same deck building mechanics, that there's only so many options out on the table at a time, but I can purchase different effects for those cards.
Well, and it's also every time you play it, you essentially are creating unique cards. So, I mean, there, and like you said, with the different expansions and all of the different mechanics that get added to it, like your ability to make that game yours and to have a different play feel every time that you're playing it is just, it's outstanding.
Yeah, and Mystic Veil didn't just create expansions that, like just add cards and keywords. Right? Mystic Veil created expansions that make entirely new card types and new rules for playing the game, and new cards that start in your deck, as well as new mechanics outside of it. And they were able to expand the number of players that can play in the game at a time.
From 4 to 6, I believe, right?
Yeah, really, really super smart game design. It's very unique gameplay. I haven't taken it out of my regular rotation since I first got exposed to it. It's great.
Absolutely. Please allow me. So
please.
I have been a absolute fan of, outside of Marvel Legendary, the DC deck builder uses a Cerberus engine, has been one of my favorite properties from Cryptozoic. I mean, absolutely, I love, Crossover Crisis is one of my favorite ones. There's also some other titles within that may not be so child or family friendly, but the whole idea is this is competitive for most of its iterations. It's all power. You don't have to worry about other types of resources. Everything is generating power. Now, there are cards that attack other players to diminish those resources. There are defense cards that allow you to protect from it. But the whole typical idea is that these cards are that you're all competitively fighting against a common enemy. And there's usually like a stack of villains, super villains that you got to defeat. And your whole idea is to buy cards from the center library that allow you to chain, much like any other deck builder. The really cool thing about not only this, in addition to Marvel Legendary, is the fact that all the IPs you can play pretty seamlessly between each other. I mean, there's a couple of mechanics here or there, but one of the things that I always found unique about the DC deck builder series is that you have like an avatar card of sorts. So, for example, in the DC basic deck builder, you have a card that is Batman, or you have a card that is Superman. And based on the IP, Superman, for example, you gain bonuses when you use multiple superpower cards. Batman gets bonuses triggered off of playing a lot of equipment cards. So in this way, they're tying a secondary bonus as to now it's actually kind of a trading wheels of sorts. So if I'm playing with this hero, I should try to get these types of cards because that triggers off of my hero. So that's my thing. So it kind of gives, I think, newer starting players an option of how they should progress skill-wise and what they should be purchasing. And again, Cartoon Network, there's actually two crossover crises where you can finally play as Dexter and keep Dee out of your laboratory. It's just a wonderful series, and they can all be played. Now there is also a Crisis version that allows you to play the game cooperatively, and this is even in addition to that. There is also, and help me on the title, James, but there's even one that has a storyline now where,
Yeah, it's called Rebirth.
Yeah. Whoo!
Rebirth is a campaign style game where you're playing cooperatively through a series of different narrative styled challenges, and a very different way to play the DC deck builder because it forms sort of a board.
Yeah.
It adds movement points as a resource in the game instead of just power. So your hero has to be able to be maneuverable and go to different points in the city to go and fight villains as they appear, because everything can move in the game. It's pretty neat.
Yeah, and I mean, you find this with almost any type of game that is introduced, that at first it is a very popular system or a mechanic or something that kind of sets the world ablaze, right? Then, within that context, everybody starts replicating it and they start producing. So which means, that's kind of beneficial for us, the players, because then the field kind of needs to advance it a little and kind of tweak it a bit and kind of figure, what is something unique or different that we can do with this format of the deck builder. And I mean, a lot of the major companies that are out there are finding constantly great ways to reinvigorate the hobby with new styles of play and new combinations and different mechanics. So yeah, the Crossover Crisis, the DC deck builder in general, great series, highly recommended. There's a ton of different IPs out there. There's a Rick and Morty game that uses this engine. Annihilamageddon, I think I'm saying it right, is the
you are. Epic Battle of the Spell Wizards. Cryptozoic went ahead and took that game and made a Cerberus engine deck builder based off of that property too.
Yeah, so a lot of great stuff out there. And again, these are just, I don't think we have any more, do we?
No, and I should mention that game, very NSFW.
Yeah.
Don't get that out at family gathering.
Yeah.
Annihilamageddon is not the one you play with grandma.
No.
That's for sure.
Yeah, unless she likes golden Beelzebub statues, but that's a pod for an episode for a different time.
Sure is. So that's a rundown of like some of the main deck builders that you can find. Guys, there's so many more out there. There's so many more that I could get into. But
networks,
we don't have
eminent
time.
domain. Yeah, we don't have time. You're right. We don't have time.
Aeon's End.
Oh, yes, absolutely.
So if you would like to get more information about us, find some of our other trainings and webinars, be able to contact us because you have a need, whatever those things are, you can go to www.thebodhanagroup.org, or you can email us at thebodhanagroup@gmail.com. Those are kind of the main ways to get a hold of us. You can also like us and follow us on Facebook. We are at the Bodhana Group on Twitter for the tweets. We encourage you, if you would like to, and you can see the cover of it there, go to Drive-Thru RPG. Check out the Wizards, Warriors, and Wellness. Go ahead and get yourself a copy. Therapeutic application of role-playing games. It's kind of the stuff that we talk about.
In the future, we are going to be having a volume that focuses all on therapeutic application of board games, and it's in its final. Yes, I'm serious. It's in its final design phase. Should be available to you very, very soon, depending on the time of this. When you found this record, it may already be available. So hey, check us out for two reasons, right? And of course, our annual Save Against Fear, typically held in October, the second weekend of, and we will again, as James said, be running online. And an additional reason, if you're a practitioner or a professional, and it is not yet April 9th through the 11th, we will be also helping to run TAGS, Therapeutic and Applied Geek and Gaming Summit, getting professionals and designers together to talk about the wonderful transformative power of Gaming.
Hey, Jack.
So yeah, James.
You're it.
I'm it. Oh, you know what, sir? Boo!
His tags.
All right, so we're gonna get ready to do our final thank yous and goodbyes. So, as usual, I have been one of your hosts, Jack Birkenstock Jr. of the Bodhana Group.
And as per usual, if you see Jack Birkenstock of the Bodhana Group, there is a decent chance that as his Ed McMahon, you will see me.
That's wild, weird stuff. That's great, Ed. That's great.
I've been James Kirk, and that has been Jack Birkenstock, and we have been the Bodhana Group. Thank you very much for joining us, and keep your eyes and ears out for our weekly continued content where we teach you about things.
Yeah, take care of yourselves, take care of each other, and we hope to see you around a table very, very, very soon. Be well, everybody.
Happy gaming, everybody.
Bye-bye.